Now joining us on Sports Mania is the lead play-by-play broadcaster for national college football coverage on Westwood One, Nate Gatter. He's worked for the SEC Network, ESPN, KMOX in St. Louis, and was the director of broadcasting and media relations for the Gateway Grizzlies. And he is, of course, a KCOU alum. Nate, thank you so much for joining us.
Mickey, I'm very glad to be here.
All right, let's start in the beginning. Growing up, who were those broadcasters that you looked up to, listened to, and what kind of effect did they have going forward?
Well, there's a St. Louis slant to this even before I moved to St. Louis, because the first guy was Bob Costas when I was really young. And I think that was just because he was more visible. And so, like, when I was, 4, 5, 6 years old and first saying that I wanted to do this, I think I was actually pointing at hosts more than I was play-by-play announcers, because the hosts spend a lot more time, obviously, visually on the screen than the play-by-play announcers do. So he was a big influence. And then as far as actual play-by-play, like as I've gotten a little bit older, even later in childhood, we moved to St. Louis when I was 12. And from a basketball standpoint, I actually don't think anybody has influenced me more than Bob Ramsey, who does radio play-by-play for St. Louis University, Billikens basketball, including the fact that I have the tendency to be a very referee critical homer when I'm allowed to be, and allowed to take sides and root for my team on a broadcast. And outside of that, I mean, I think especially from a radio standpoint, which is obviously a focal point for me of late, it's the typical names that you hear. I think Kevin Harlan gets the most credit, especially on football, and he's very, very good. And there's some things you can take from him. I think if you have a relatively normal person's voice in the way that I do, as compared to the voice that he has, there are also some things that you can't necessarily mimic that he does. John Sadak is kind of in that bucket too. I think he's really underappreciated, both for how good his play-by-play is and also for how incredible his voice is. Adam Amin, when he used to do a lot more radio back when he was at ESPN, it was not atypical for him to be part of their Sunday afternoon NFL radio coverage. I thought he was really terrific, and he was, much more within the normal voice range than some of the other guys, which made him more useful for me when I was learning. All of those guys had influence, as well as a bunch of guys. I don't do much baseball anymore, and I do none on the radio since I was doing Grizzlies games, which now is 4 years ago. But I think listening to baseball announcers is also probably the best way, and doing baseball play-by-play on the radio is the best way to learn how to be conversational and how to develop a style that works for you and works for the listener on a night-to-night basis over 80, 100, 120, 162 games, whatever it turns out to be, depending on the level that you're at. So that's the conversational element was not natural, right? I think we all start out just at 18, 19, 20 years old with high-pitched, borderline prepubescent voices, trying to imitate like John Miller or Kevin Harlan or whomever, and speaking out of the very, very back of our throats and trying to make our voices sound like we're not 18 or 19 years old. And then you listen to the Eric Nadells and Pat Hughes and Joe Blocks of the world. Dave Fleming is in this bucket too. And you learn about the value of that conversational sound. And then over time, your voice will change and you kind of marry those skills. So there are many, many, many influences. And I think, Vince Scully famously would talk about the advice that he got from Red Barber not to listen to other announcers, because you can only be yourself. You're the only one of you. And I think there's an element of truth to that as far as style is concerned and personality is concerned. You don't want to try to wear another broadcaster's personality into the booth, just the same as you wouldn't want to marry or wear another person's personality on a date, or something like that, because you're ultimately hustling backwards if somebody's going to start liking what you're doing personally or professionally when you're not being yourself. And because you're the only one of you out there, and so that's your comparative advantage in some ways. But I do think there's tremendous value when you're learning the fundamentals, when you're learning how to do things from a structural standpoint, from a vocal standpoint, how to kind of mess around with things and find your niche in those areas that are not personality, because until you're on the air, you never would have thought a lot about fundamentals of how to call a certain play on the radio. I think it is great to listen. But how you counteract what Scully's talking about is you don't want to be getting to the point where it's time to be a professional and stand on your own and still sound like you're mimicking somebody. I think the best counter to that is to listen to many people, right? Either listen to nobody or listen to a lot. Because if you listen to only one guy and you're just imitating that guy, at a certain point, that's going to start to sound silly. But I think imitating a few people that you like early on and then gradually becoming an amalgam of many, many announcers who you think have certain strengths, and ultimately then fusing your personality and yourself and what you think is most important into that is how you gradually develop both a polished but still personal style.
It's hard to be able to call a catcher using his mask and getting called for a balk to scrape the ball towards him that we saw in Major League Baseball or minor league baseball a couple of days ago until you've already heard that called. So that's a great point in, understanding what other broadcasters do. Kind of going back to high school, what ended up making you come to Mizzou? Was it broadcast? Was it more so, print journalism, or what was that?
Broadcasting was part of it for sure. To be honest with you, I didn't really want to go to Mizzou. Not because I had anything against the university, but because I didn't like the idea of going to the flagship state institution in my state. I wanted to leave home. I wanted to go somewhere farther away. I wanted something more, I don't know, exotic sounds over the top, but something a little more individualized, something a little more unusual. And ultimately, what made me choose Mizzou was just that the logistics made too much sense, that it was in-state public school, so it was therefore relatively affordable, and it had this great journalism school. And the choice worked out great, mainly because, like almost all 17 to then 18 and 19-year-olds, I realized very, very quickly that my desire as a high school junior and senior to get somewhere far away from home really didn't make a lot of sense. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but once you're multiple, I was 2 hours away from home or so. Once you get more than an hour from home in a place that like your parents and other people that you hang out with, like and know around your hometown would never go on a regular basis, like there's really no difference between being 90 minutes away and being 900 miles away. Like they're functionally the same thing. You're far enough away that nobody in their day-to-day life is happening upon you. You're essentially in a different place at that point. It doesn't really matter how far you are. And in many ways, it's nice to be closer because you can go home for things that come up. And, in my case, I was doing a fair amount of driving, not only around the mid-Missouri area, but even sometimes back to St. Louis by the end of my college career in order to do games. So it was good to be in a place where then I continued. Also, I have lived in St. Louis at least as my, permanent long-term address continuously. And so it's also allowed me to continue building things while I was in college that I've taken advantage of since I've been back in St. Louis. And that then I didn't have to leave behind the relationships and opportunities I built for myself in college when I left. I've been able to continue maintaining a relationship with Mizzou that has been really valuable to me and hopefully to the university now for quite a few years, including the 7.5 years or so now since I've graduated. So to answer your question, it sort of just became the right choice and the choice that I had to make. And I'm really grateful for how it worked out. I think the beauty of a school the size of Missouri is that there's going to be some option for you almost no matter what, right? Whatever your niche is, which is not necessarily true if you go to a school of 4,000 or 5,000 undergraduates, because they're just not going to have the same breadth of offerings. And I'm a good example in some ways because not only did I take advantage of things like KCOU and the infrastructure that exists at the university, but even though when I was sitting through orientation and they were doing the bit about how, half of you are going to change your major, so it's okay if you don't know what you want to do. And I was like, well, I know exactly what I want to do. And I've known exactly what I wanted to do since I was 4, so that's not going to be me. And I was kind of right. I did know what I wanted to do, and it hasn't changed. And I was still wrong. I still ended up changing my major as a junior because that was when they said, okay, it's time to start putting in a bunch of free hours at, KOMU, the university TV station, or KVIA, the radio station, or the Columbia Missourian, or whatever your track was going to be, TV, radio, digital, print, digital, some combination. It was time to start putting in all that time. And I said, well, I'm doing a bunch of games for free already at Lincoln University in Jeff City, Westminster College in Fulton, D2, D3 schools that would let me get on the air in a bunch in addition to the games I was doing at KCOU. And that was really all I wanted to do. I had no interest in being a TV anchor reporter, not because there's anything wrong with that, but I just knew if play-by-play wasn't an option for me, there were a bunch of non-broadcasting related careers that I would pursue before I would take a job as a local TV reporter in rural Alabama. It just wasn't going to happen. And so I didn't want to do that. And so I actually changed my major as a junior into political science and graduated in something totally unrelated. I still had a minor in journalism, and I'm still very, very grateful for the couple of years that I had doing a lot of the journalism prerequisites and lower level classes, because I think that background in AP style, learning how to write, learning how to read critically, and to edit myself and others was really, really valuable. Having some functional basic knowledge of some of the technology that's commonplace in our industry. I am terrible at that. I mean, I'm almost useless, but it's still good to be exposed to those things. And definitely the writing in particular, I think is super, super valuable. And as we live in a world where young people read less and less, I think getting that kind of formalized writing instruction is so valuable, because even if you're not writing per se, if you're on the air, everything that we're doing is writing. In terms of literally, sometimes I'm writing a particular soliloquy in an open, I'm writing a scene set, I'm writing whatever. So on very rare occasions, I'm sketching out some kind of final call in a big moment that I might want to work off of. I'm still ironing that out and exactly how I like to approach that. Even outside of all of that, I think if you become a really, really good writer and editor, somebody who understands active voice, somebody who understands, grammar, somebody who understands how to communicate points in the way that you want to, it's only going to make you better, because one of the things that separates average from good and good from great in this business is the ability to essentially write in real time, to be speaking extemporaneously and not guessing, to know where your sentence is going to end before it starts, to pick the A word and not the C word, not because the C word won't work, right? Like a mid-tier word can get you through that sentence, but because if you pick that better word, especially on radio, you're going to get more value out of that sentence, whether it's because that's more particularly descriptive or because it's more valuable, more economical to the sentence. It's going to get you through quicker, and it's going to conserve space to keep you even with the play, or to leave more room for an analyst to get in, or whatever. All of that has value. It's on the margins, but it all has value. And frankly, in this business, because of how competitive it is, we're living on the margins a lot, where it's pretty marginal differences between the person who gets a job and the person who doesn't, especially at the national level, but even a rung or two below that. So a long way to answer your question, but I'm very, even though I wasn't super intentional about it, and even though some of the specific offerings of the journalism school didn't turn out to be right for me by the time I was an upperclassman, I think the foundational value and the baseline value of an institution that really understands how to teach the fundamentals and the values of a good media and communication and journalism education is still hugely worthwhile.
That's something that I know personally I'm seeing more and more of. I don't know if the industry is seeing more and more of that, but these, broadcasters are going into different majors that are very writing heavy. Emma Tiedemann went into education, and she wanted to kind of be an English teacher as her backup. I know a lot of them go into communications, stuff like that. So that's good to hear that political science as well, journalism minor. You also led perfectly into my next question. Once on campus, you got involved everywhere. Westminster College, down in Jefferson City doing games for Lincoln, KCOU Maneater. You went to Cape Cod for a summer, Northwoods League for a summer. Kind of KCOU, did that lead into those opportunities, or did you kind of randomly find those throughout?
I think yes and no. I think what I got from KCOU was a place that was going to be welcoming to somebody who had a relatively low skill level but an appetite to learn, and was going to provide opportunities. What KCOU can't do, in my opinion, if you're really serious about play-by-play, is be the only place that you do games. If you don't do any games over the summer and you don't do any games anywhere else, I don't know what the maximum is you could get. If you took everything that you could get at KCOU, maybe you could do 20, 25 games
I
a
don't know if
school
that's possible
year.
nowadays.
That would even be pushing it. I think most likely you're going to get, one football game, which it won't be true as a freshman, might not even be true as a sophomore. You're going to get one or two men's basketball games, one or two women's basketball games, and then maybe 2 to 4 baseball, softball games, depending on the demand and depending on how many home games there are in a particular year. So most likely, and again, there's going to be some play in those joints, and it's been a while since I've been walking those halls, but I would say most likely you're looking at 10 to 15 to maybe 20 games in a year. And that is perfectly good. And those games have value because they're going to expose you to environments that you can't otherwise get, right? If you're doing an SEC basketball game, Mizzou's hosting Kentucky or hosting Florida, or hosting Auburn, that's going to be a different kind of environment than you can get, frankly, at a Lincoln or Westminster game. That's just how it is. But you cannot get that much better in 10 to 15 games in a year. Certainly not enough to pop out the other end, having done maybe a combined 50 games, probably closer to 35, 40 in your entire time as a college student, and expected to be ready for the professional level. I was doing it varied because Cape Cod was a much shorter schedule than Northwoods, and then what I did with the Grizzlies between my junior and senior year. But I was certainly doing, on average, 100 games or more a year. And I think that was immeasurably valuable for me. In fact, I don't think I could have done a lot of the other things that I've done since if I hadn't done that many. And thankfully, those things are sort of established now in that I think ever since I started doing it, there have been Mizzou students doing Lincoln games continuously since then. And we're now probably on our fourth, fifth different people who have done it since I started doing it in probably 2015, maybe 16. And Westminster, I don't know if it's been continuous, but certainly there have been Mizzou students who have been involved with it, at least a few other people since me. I didn't do any William Woods games, but I know people have done games there, which is also in Fulton, NAIA school. And those are just huge. I didn't get paid for those games, and that's a luxury. Not everybody has the ability to work for free, even as undergrads. So I recognize that was a luxury that was afforded to me. But doing those games, it was only home games, but it probably got me 8 to 10 football games over the course of 2 years, probably 20 or more basketball games over the course of a couple of years, about a year and a half. Actually did a couple of games that Ben McCollum coached in when he was at Northwest Missouri, and then saw him at the Missouri Valley Championship game that I did for Westwood last month, coaching Drake. And obviously now he's at Iowa. So that was kind of cool. You never know people you're going to cross paths with, but even if you don't meet anybody who ends up, affecting your career or anything like that. And I didn't. I mean, Ben McCollum doesn't care about my career one way or the other. I think those games make you so much better. And more than anything, the summer college baseball stuff. If people can do that, which again, some of those are unpaid or borderline unpaid, and it's not the cheapest thing to find someplace to live short-term in a state that you've never been. And they're demanding jobs, but nothing is going to compare you for minor league baseball or prepare you for minor league baseball better than that. And even if you don't ever do minor league baseball, it's going to instill a level of awareness about your broadcasts and provide opportunity for improvement that, if you're intentional about it, is unmatched anywhere else. I mean, when I was in the Northwoods League, I did 72 games in 76 days. Like, you are getting better whether you want to or not. And if you want to get better, you can get way better in the course of a few months. I actually kind of miss it. I don't miss the Northwoods League per se. I definitely don't miss the grind of any minor league baseball. What I miss is when I was much worse at this job, and it was so much easier to improve very quickly. Like, I could put on a tape that summer. I could put on a tape even 2 weeks apart. Certainly if I put on 2 tapes a month apart, there was going to be a dramatic difference. Now, when I go from week 5 to week 12, at best, you're talking about like little tweaks that, to me, I can really hear. To the average listener, I don't know if you can. And even then, it's more about, did I execute this right, than do I know what I'm doing? Am I capable of it? And that can be very frustrating because it means that it's totally possible that you have a dud game at the end of the year. Like, it wasn't like I did 15 football games or whatever I did this fall, and the 15th one was the best, and the 14th one was the second best, and so on and so forth, right? Like broadly, I think I was better at the end of the year than the beginning. But sometimes you have a good game, sometimes you don't. Some of those factors have to do with where your booth location is, what your view is, how healthy your voice and your body feels that particular day. Like there are all kinds of factors that can impact a broadcast. And so I do somewhat miss the KCOU era when I felt like I was so capable of improving on a game to game, certainly month to month basis. And if you can get yourself to really invest and ultimately fall in love with that process, that is the key. You have to embrace that growth mindset, which is something I never did. I always struggled with that as a student academically. I came to college 100% with a fixed mindset, and broadcasting cured me of that, because when you listen back to yourself, there's no way to deny how much better you can get from 1 month to the next, from 1 year to the next. And it forced me to accept that growth was that possible, and that hard work was really the solution, and that a growth mindset is the key really to any success in life.
I was going to ask you exactly this question later. As a broadcaster personally, I've found that that's one of the best parts of broadcasting is seeing that growth and getting better. But it starts to, that rapid growth in the beginning starts to drop off as you go. Are those little tweaks enough to keep you going, keep you, almost fulfill that need to grow as a broadcaster? Or is it maybe something else?
Well, it's a combination of things. I get so much more validation and reward and joy now than would have been available to me at that age, which helps supplement, right? Like I get to do games that come right down to the wire with 100,000 people in the stadium. Like that's something I could only dream about when I was at that stage. So I find a lot of joy in being where my feet are, which I did at the time too. But it's harder to internalize that on a day-to-day basis when everybody knows the only reason you're there in the Northwoods League is to get better, to get something else, right? Nobody has ever showed up day one as a Northwoods League announcer and said, I've made it. This is what I want for the rest of my life. Not because there's anything wrong with the Northwoods League. This could be true of anything else. I'm singling them out, right? It's the same thing at KCOU. Nobody says, as valuable as we and as much as we all love it, nobody ever got to KCOU and said, like, if you're a KCOU broadcaster for 20 years, something's gone terribly wrong, right? Like, I don't know what it is, but something's gone wrong. You want to be a 4, maybe 5-year KCOU announcer and you want to move on to something professionally. That's the nature of it. That's the whole point. And so it can be a challenge to be where your feet are. Doing Michigan, Ohio State with 100,000 people there, it was not a challenge to be where my feet were, right? There was nowhere on planet Earth that I would have rather been for those 3.5 hours, whatever it was. That said, to answer your question, absolutely, I still find a tremendous amount of value in that and a tremendous amount of satisfaction in it. In fact, it's arguably more fulfilling. It's just much more frustrating because it's harder. But your goals will keep going up. That's anybody who falls in love with the process. You're never going to get it, right? You're never going to catch it. I remember Matthew McConaughey's Oscar speech when he talked about how the person that he chases is himself in 5 years or 10 years. You're never going to catch that person. And it's always going to be out there in front of you. But the chase is the rewarding part. The other thing is, and like, I'm not afraid to say this, not because I think I'm on their level or because I'm nipping at their heels or anything like that. I will never catch them. But my goal is to be among the absolute best in the country at this. Like, I don't hesitate to say that out loud. My goal is not to do the games I'm doing, do a pretty good job, pat myself on the back and go home. My goal is to be as good as our top guys. You know, Westwood One's primetime NFL guys are Kevin Harlan, Ryan Radke, Ian Eagle, Kevin Kugler. My goal was to be as good as them. I'm not there. I might never be. But my goal is to be as good as them. And so in that sense, every bit of improvement is enormously rewarding and fulfilling at this stage because it is so hard fought. Every inch of improvement now, it's such diminishing returns, right? It's so much harder to get it. It takes so much longer. It takes so much more effort. It takes great execution to get exactly what I want. And the tantalizing part of it, the frustrating part, and I think especially baseball broadcasters will talk about this, baseball players, in fact, will talk about this, that what separates a major leaguer from a AA player is not talent, is not ability. It's consistency, right? A double A player, most players, certainly the top 100 prospect type guys at double A on their best day are good enough to get 3 or 4 hits in the big leagues, are good enough to go 6 scoreless innings in the big leagues. The difference is they're not good enough the next day, right? The next day they go 0 for 4 in double A and they strike out 3 times. And they would have been even worse in the big leagues and looked silly, right? That's the difference, is can you do it consistently? Same thing is true for announcers. On my best day, I have had games that are primetime NFL Westwood One level. I have done TV games that are absolutely national network level. But that's not enough. That's enough to indicate potential, maybe. It's enough to indicate possibility, but it's not enough. What broadcasting is about is not how good are you on your 10 out of 10 day. It's about how good are you on your 7 to 8 out of 10 day. My belief and what I have internalized is that anytime you do a big game, anytime you do what I would call a step game, something that you've never done before, right? You're doing a TV game when you've only ever done radio. You're going to do a linear TV game when you've only ever done digital. You're going to do a network TV game when you've only ever done, regional games. You're going to do national on radio when you've never done that before, whatever it is. And then it's going to be a bigger game, right? You're going to go from doing mid-tier games like you've only ever done the number 4 Big 12 game to now you're getting a primetime top 25 game, right? Or in my case, the schedule that we did was a laundry list of blue bloods last year. Or even better, last March for when I did my first games for Westwood, like my second national game ever and my first true national network game was the NCAA tournament. I'd never done anything remotely like that before. You can't expect to be a 9 or 10 out of 10 in that game. It's just not realistic. Like, what is the likelihood that under that level of pressure, under that kind of microscope, in a new environment, with a bunch of bells and whistles and structures that you've never been in, with bosses you haven't worked with analysts and other folks on air you haven't worked with, that you're going to be as good or better than you've ever been? Very, very low, functionally 0. The best you can hope for is a 7 to 8 out of 10. And that should be your goal, 7 to 8 out of 10, because that's who you really are. That's what you're able to bring on a regular basis. And so then my goal over the course of a season, over the course of a year, is not to get as many 10 out of 10s as I can. I guess it is, but only in a very broad, generalized way. It's really to raise the 7 or 8 out of 10. Now, is my 7 or 8 out of 10 better? Is my average game better now than it was a year ago? If so, I'm succeeding, because that's what I can rely on if and when the call comes to do Monday Night Football filling in out of nowhere, or if and when the call comes to do a network TV game filling in out of nowhere. What is the level I can really rely upon? What is my safety net? What can I feel secure in? And that's 7 or 8 out of 10, not 10 out of 10.
Kind of related to that, before you left college, you picked up a little bit of hardware. For those of you who don't know, the Jim Nantz Award is given yearly to this top collegiate sportscaster in the country, and Nate is the only person from Mizzou to have won the award. In picking your reel, not only for that award, but also for jobs to apply, everywhere, do you feel like those 10 out of 10 moments came common enough to have a reel worthy of a job or the award? I mean, obviously they did for the award, but how did you pick your reel?
Yes and no. I think when you're picking a reel, you are in some ways beholden to the game more so than how you did, right? If you had a phenomenal quarter of football and there were only 2 total first downs and 7 punts, that's not a compelling reel. Doesn't matter how many great stories you told, how accurate your description was, how flawless your elocution was. It makes no difference. That's not a good reel. You can't use it. A reel, maybe not 100%, but pretty much, use football, for example. Your reel is going to be one drive. It's going to be at least 5 minutes, preferably 6 or 7, but it's definitely not going to be more than 10. Already, that's limiting. And it pretty much has to end in a touchdown. Maybe it can end in another compelling highlight like an interception or a strip sack. Maybe it can end in a field goal, but I'm skeptical. So you've narrowed it down considerably. If you do an entire football game, how many 5 to 10 minute highlight ending drives are you going to get? Maybe in some games it'll be 10. In some games it might be 4. Right? You don't know. So the game is going to dictate the reel. So that's again why I talk about 7 or 8 out of 10 is really the key. Because you can't just say, well, that was my best drive, because your best drive might not be the best reel drive. So what it's really about is, can I be at that 8 out of 10? Can I stretch it to a 9 out of 10 level? And can I maintain that for a whole quarter or for a whole half or for a whole game, so that when those moments do come along, that's where I get my reel from. Because in many ways, you're beholden to the game on forming your reel. And sometimes, and this was true in the one NFL game that I got to do last year, which I try not to think about things like reels, but sometimes you get a game that becomes a blowout very, very quickly. And that means that, the whole fourth quarter, and in my case, the majority of the third quarter is just not interesting. It's not normal football. You have to do the game in a different way. So ordinarily, what I want for a reel, and it's going to be a little different if you're applying for the Nance Award, and I'll explain why. Ordinarily, what I want for a reel is 30 to 60 seconds of highlights, then another 30 to 60 seconds of open stuff, which would usually be like one title card scene set where you're talking over the initial, for TV purposes, where you're talking over the initial shot coming on the air, you're welcoming people, and then 1 or 2 initial tosses on camera. I used to do full opens. I think it just takes too long, and I don't think decision makers, especially TV decision makers, really watch it. So I think that keeps it moving. And so now you're 90 seconds, hopefully, into the reel. And then you can put on, if it's a football, basketball, baseball reel, whatever it is, you put on your 5 to 10 minute stretch of that one drive or that one half inning. I mean, baseball is in some ways even harder, because you need a half inning where probably at least 1 run scores. Certainly there's a highlight or 2, but it's not longer than 9 or 10 minutes. And you don't want there to be a bunch of walks. I prefer for my reel total to be under 10 minutes, just because I think there's something psychological about a reel saying it's 9 minutes and 39 seconds instead of 10 minutes and 14 seconds. So just be cognizant of the fact. I think it's easy when you're building a reel to think about the reason why you're putting every single thing in there, because you're the artist and you're like, oh, well, that shows this great thing that I did, and that shows it. You got to think about it as though, maybe go on and Google Jim Nance Award reels and look up some other people on YouTube who you've never met, and see how long you really are watching theirs before you look at your phone, or before you check something else, or before you have an urge to click out of it. Because you got to get people's attention, you got to maintain it. So keep the highlights tight, keep the on-camera stuff tight, get into the inning or the stretch, whatever it's going to be. Nance Award reels, you don't have to worry about that as much, because people are actually going to watch. Right? That's their job, to actually watch and evaluate, as compared to a decision maker when you're applying for a job where you don't even know that they're going to watch it at all, especially if you're like cold contacting them. You don't even know they're going to watch it. And if they do, they're under no obligation to watch more than 20 seconds of it. My Nance Award reel also had a quick little title card, like sort of scene setting open. I actually wasn't doing games that included doing anything on camera at that time, so I didn't include that. John Chalesnik, who runs STAA, says not to include opens. I don't know if I agree with that. I think you certainly can be compelling in an open. Just keep it short. You don't need a 2.5 minute open. And then play to your strength. If your strength is TV play-by-play and you've got a couple of sports of that, just do that. If your strength is radio play-by-play and you got a couple of sports of that, do that. If you think you're good, not great at TV, radio, play-by-play, and, TV storytelling, like you've got some local TV news sports packages that you think are good, but you're not great at any of them, and you want to do 5 minutes and 5 minutes, or I guess he wants 6 minutes. So you do 6 minutes and 6 minutes, and then you put a 2 or 3 minute package in there. I'm fine with that too, but it should be your strengths. Nobody should feel like, well, in order to win the Nance Award, I have to have all of these things. In order to win the Nance Award, you have to be the best. Or really, you have to be among the 10 or 20 best and then get lucky that we decide you're the best, because there are always going to be people. First of all, we totally get things wrong sometimes. And second of all, there are marginal calls even at that point, right? I mean, Noah Eagle and Drew Carter finished, well, in the reverse order, 1-2. Who's to say who was better, right? It's bang, bang. Um, when I won, Jake Garcia finished second. He's a sports anchor and reporter. He's phenomenal. Went to Arizona State. He was great. He could have easily won. Connor Onion finished like toward the back end of the top 20, and he's one of the best under 35 announcers in the country now, and he's going to be one of the voices of his generation. So those things are not the end all be all, but my advice is just put the best stuff that you do. And if you can have some variety, I had a quick little open thing on TV, then TV baseball play-by-play and radio basketball play-by-play. If you can mix up the sports and you can mix up the mediums, I think that will help you, but only if the standard remains your best or within shouting distance of your best. If you're dropping your standard just because you've got to check a box, I don't think that's serving your interest.
Joe Davis was just an honorable mention when in his year. Now he's calling the World Series. Real quick, got 30 seconds left. Last question we're asking everybody. What kind of impact has KCOU had throughout your career going forward?
KCOU provided me the opportunity and the people, especially who were a couple of years older than me, to fall in love with this business and to feel comfortable in it and to feel like it was possible for me to do it. And it gave me the platform then to pursue all those other avenues that ultimately made me better.
Nate, thank you so much for your time and good luck going forward.
Mickey, I appreciate you.